Ladies and gentlemen, first, we would like to kindly ask the Deputy Minister Tian and the delegation from Tuvalu to take a group photo. Please take off your mask and feel free to put on your mask after the picture. Thank you. Now we would like to show you a video of Minister Kofe's COP26 side event statement.
In Tuvalu, we are living the realities of climate change, sea level rise, as we stand watching today here at COP26. We cannot wait for speeches when the sea is rising around us with time. Climate mobility must come to the forefront. We must take bold, alternative action today to secure tomorrow. Tuvalu.
And the Deputy Minister Tian onto the stage. We would like to invite Deputy Minister Tian for his welcoming remarks.
Of the Honorable Minister of Justice, Communication and Foreign Affairs, Simon Kofe of Tuvalu, and your delegation, and also Excellency, our Ambassador to Tuvalu, and your lead, my colleagues, Talofa. Talofa means how are you in the local language. But today, it gave me a very distinct privilege to introduce the Honorable Minister Simon Kofe of Tuvalu to give us remarks entitled of preparing now to face, to secure tomorrow. I think it probably title is something like that. Before I give this floor to the Honorable Minister, I would like to take this opportunity to show our appreciation through Honorable Minister to their government for their continuous staunch support for Taiwan in international organizations such as United Nations, WHO, UNFCCC in particular. And this year marks the 44th anniversary of our relations with Tuvalu. Among these 44 years, I think a lot of projects has been accomplished. Among them, I think one of them is very, very important, which is G4LTE project, which is making the digital nation concept become a reality. Aside from that, we also have projects like agriculture, education, climate change, all those projects now are bearing some fruits. Now, without further ado, let me give the floor to the Honorable Minister. And please you join me to give him a round of applause. Now,
On your page.
Now, floor is yours. Thank you. Thank you, again, for the very kind words and welcoming to today's session. It's an honor for me to be here and to be given this opportunity to talk a little bit about the work that we're doing in Tuvalu. Very fortunate to have this opportunity. Honorable Deputy Minister, in preparing for this trip, your ambassador Henry Lin suggested, or maybe not suggested, insisted that I deliver a talk when I come to Taiwan. He really makes us work hard, ambassador. But no, it's a real honor to be here, to have this opportunity to speak to diplomats, aspiring diplomats. And I'll try to be brief and have more time later on to answer questions. I'd like to talk about a project called Future Now. It's a project launched in Tuvalu in 2021. And as the name implies, it looks into a future that is coming for Tuvalu and for the rest of the world. And it requires us to act in the present in order to secure the future that is coming. Scientists are saying that Tuvalu will be one of the first countries in the world to be fully submerged by rising sea levels due to climate change. There's a prediction of about 50 to 100 years. And so that's the worst case scenario that we're looking at. And it's important for, as a responsible government, that we are preparing, putting a plan in place to prepare ourselves for that future. And so the Future Now project represents Tuvalu's government's plan for a worst case scenario. In Tuvalu, maybe I'll give a bit of context about Tuvalu. I know many of you probably have never been to Tuvalu. Tuvalu is one of the smallest countries in the world in terms of land area. We're about 27 square kilometers. Flat islands, no hills, no mountains. And we have a very small population of 10,000 people. I spoke to your Minister of Justice yesterday, and he mentioned that they employ about 10,000 people in the ministry. And I was telling him that's the whole population of my country. So it's quite small. You could fit us in probably into a stadium, but we're recognized as a sovereign state under international law, and we try our very best to fulfill our obligations as a state. If we just flick to the next PowerPoint. So the Future Now project, there are three. There are three key initiatives under this project. One initiative looks at the use of values, culture, diplomacy, our messaging to the world. And the second looks at how we can retain our statehood under international law. As we know, there's a general acceptance that in order for you to exist as a state under international law, you need to have a physical territory, an effective government that's in place, a population, and the capacity to enter into relations with other states. Those of you studying international affairs, you know that the Montevideo Convention is the convention that sets out this criteria. However, I would argue that that criteria is not fully accepted by the international community. There are practices from history that tells us that criteria is not always followed. I think you're aware of concepts of a government in exile, government that does not have effective control of their territory, yet they are recognized by other countries as being the legitimate government in place. So there are many examples from history that tells us that criteria is not fully applicable in the world today. And so statehood is an important issue for us, because if we were to take the Montevideo Convention as the standard, then Tuvalu stands to possibly lose its physical territory in the next 50 to 100 years. So the question then arises, can you exist as a state without a physical territory?
As I said, this project is called Future Now, and it's looking to that future of a worst case scenario and how we can best prepare for that. So there are many approaches that we're taking to secure that statehood, and I'll talk a little bit about it in my presentation today. The third initiative looks at creating a digital nation. So if the world accepts that Tuvalu's statehood is permanent regardless of the impact of climate change, we want to be able to demonstrate that we can fulfill our obligations under international law. And this can be done and achieved through the concept of a digital nation, where we create a digital jurisdiction online that enables us to migrate all our governance and administrative services online and enable us to provide services to our people. And as part of that project as well, I'll discuss a little bit about how we're using that as well to preserve our culture and our way of life. So that, in a nutshell, those are the three key initiatives under this project. I'll begin first by talking about Tuvalu values and its relevance to the international community today. We came into office at the end of 2019, just before the pandemic. Our borders have been closed for the last 3 years. And so we had a lot of time in Tuvalu to prepare our policies and put things in place. And so one of the very first policies we developed was the foreign policy which we launched in 2020. And the vision that I had for our foreign policy was to look at how we can bring our values, the principles that underpins our way of life in Tuvalu, into our foreign policy. And many asked questions during our consultation as to what is the relevance of Tuvaluan culture to the international arena. And so my response to that is, obviously, if you bring the practices of your culture into the international arena, that may not be relevant because practices are different. There's the dances, the performances, and different practices. But what we really want to bring are the principles and the values that underpins those cultural practices. Because once we're able to define what those are, then they are universal in a sense, that they're applicable to any context that we find ourselves in. And so there are three key concepts from our culture that I just want to touch on briefly today, and they're listed up on the board. The first is Olanga Whakawhenua. The translation of that is communal living system. And in Tuvalu, we are predominantly a community-based society where we live in very close communities. We value relationships. We respect our elders. We look after our neighbors. And so these are the systems and the way of life in Tuvalu. Another example is our land tenure system. In our land tenure system, land is not owned by an individual. Land is owned by a collective group, family, a clan, or a village. And so that reflects the way of life in Tuvalu. That is how we live. And so I thought that it's relevant that we bring some of these principles and values, because I feel that the world, the global context that we now find ourselves in is like a single community. We've worked for decades. The world has been moving towards integrating our economies, improving our trade and relationships. And so we've come to a stage where we're so interconnected that we've become like a single community. And with that also comes the threats and the vulnerabilities of being interconnected, because you can now be affected by the actions of one nation, one country. Things that are happening, for example, in Ukraine, is affecting how the individual Tuvaluan is living now. They're experiencing high costs of food, freight has gone up, inflation has gone up. And so that's the context that we find ourselves in today. And so this is how I think that promoting these values that focus on the community well-being, the well-being of all nations is important at the times that we are living in right now. I know that as nations, we tend to focus on national interest. We're very competitive with other countries. We push our national interests. But this approach and the way we view things, because we're so interconnected, there are limitations to that approach. Because if you don't draw the line somewhere, then your actions become harmful to your neighbor. And so this is why it's very important that we like to promote these principles and values that underpin community way of life. And so in a community way of life, we emphasize the responsibility of individuals, the respect for others, being a good neighbor, all these things that are, I guess, moral and ethical principles are very important for the times that we are living in. Kaitasi is the other concept. It's literal. The literal translation, kaitasi, is eating together, and it represents a family and a clan where they have shared resources, but also have a shared responsibility to manage those resources for the benefit of everyone in the clan. The third is fale pili. Fale pili, the fale means house, and pili means close. So the literal translation of it is houses that are in close proximity to one another. And in Tuvalu, we live very close to one another, and there is a general implied responsibility that when you live in such close proximity to your neighbor, that you have a responsibility to your neighbor. And in the village context, you have kids from your neighborhood that also, they come to your house, you also have a responsibility to look after them. And so these are very important concepts for us in Tuvalu, but we feel that they are also relevant to the international environment that we now find ourselves in. So I hope that's given you a bit of an understanding of the context of Tuvalu and how we weave this into our foreign policy. And our hope is that countries that hear about this can be, can appeal to their conscience, that they do the right thing, that do, act in a way that does not harm other people. And so issues like climate change, for example, it cannot be solved by one country. It requires collective effort of every member of the community to address issues like climate change. And so this is how we use a values-based approach to resolving global issues. And this is basically the lens by which we assess, we view the world that we live in. Now just jumping onto the issue of statehood, and I've briefly explained the concept and the idea behind statehood. In our foreign policy, we insist that any country that desires to form relationships with Tuvalu or wants to reaffirm our relationship, that they must recognize that Tuvalu's statehood is permanent regardless of the impacts of climate change, and also that our claims to our maritime zones are also permanent. Climate change would never change those things or affect our status under the international law. So I'm pleased to say that there are 10 countries, including Taiwan, that has accepted this proposition, this legal proposition, and we've done this through the signing of joint communiques to reaffirm our relationships. So we're very thankful to the government and the people of Taiwan for standing with us on this principle, as we see climate change as an existential threat to the nation and to the people of Tuvalu. So we appreciate very much the support from Taiwan. And the approach that we've taken is one where we focus on the bilateral. We understand that there are conventions and treaties like the UN Convention on Law of the Sea that talks about maritime boundaries, talks about entitlements of states. But that convention was developed in the 70s. It took about 10 years to negotiate that convention. And it was developed at a time when climate change was not so much an issue. And so there's a lot of gray areas in that convention that does not address the concerns of countries like Tuvalu. And so obviously there's two approaches. We can engage the UN processes, which we've already started that. We're working with the International Law Commission in how this can be developed and applied to introduce changes on the international stage. But the other approach that we've taken as well is one of the bilateral. As I said, we put it in our foreign policy and requiring countries to accept this proposition. This approach is important because, as you know, the sources of law on the international stage is firstly conventions and agreements that countries agree to, but also the secondary source is customary international law. And these are not necessarily things that are agreed to in conventions or treaties, but they are taken from state practice. When states behave in a particular way, and that practice is widespread, then that contributes to the formation of new customary international law. And so our hope and the approach that we've taken under our foreign policy is that the more countries we can get on board and accept this legal proposition, that we are contributing to the formation of customary international law and new international standards that cater for the needs of countries like Tuvalu. So this has been a very important policy for us. We've been working tirelessly for the last few years. Although the borders have been closed for some time and restricted our efforts to meet and really advance this, we've done pretty well with 10 countries. And we're hoping to get more countries on board. All right, so finally, I'll talk a little bit about the digital nation. I've been asked in the past as to what is my definition of a digital nation, because many people will have different understanding of what a digital nation is. For me, the definition of a digital nation is a nation that has migrated all its governance and administrative services online to enable it to function fully as a state remotely. And so it's almost like you are decoupling the physical with the online presence and enable a country to function in that way. And it's tied to our efforts on the issue of statehood. And so we want to be able to demonstrate that it's not just about recognizing our statehood. We need to be functional as well. We need to have a framework in place that enables us to fulfill all our obligations as a state and continue to provide the services to our people. That's obviously the core motivation of why we are creating a digital nation. But there are many other purposes that can be achieved in developing a digital nation. And one of the important ones for us is preserving our culture, creating an online, a virtual copy of Tuvalu that enables us to take a snapshot of what Tuvalu looks like now, project data onto that platform so that we're able to see projections of the impacts of climate change on our territory, projections into the next 50 to 100 years, what Tuvalu will look like. It's also a tool for our advocacy to try and influence other countries to take stronger climate action. And it's also a space that allows Tuvaluans wherever they are to connect. One of the initiatives, the sort of activity that we are undertaking now for this digital twin is how we can preserve our culture. And one initiative is building a people's archive where we can digitize whether it be material things, objects, or something that is of value to Tuvaluans, and then we'll create a digital version of that and have an archive online. And so we'll be asking every Tuvaluan, every one of the 10,000 or 12,000 people that live in Tuvalu, what is one thing that you want to preserve, for forever? And that's the question we'll be asking every individual. And we'll take that and create a digital copy of that and put it online. And so we will have an archive of the people and as a representation of valuable items and materials of every Tuvaluan. And then we will obviously link that to different areas on Tuvalu. So the Tuvalu digital virtual copy of Tuvalu will allow people to navigate, to look at what it looks like, but also to find information and stories about our history online. And so with every object that we're collecting, there will be a story behind it that we'll be able to narrate that online as well, and link that to different locations on the digital copy of Tuvalu. So that's the presentation on the 3 key initiatives under the Future Now project. And thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
For questions.
Well, thank you very much, Honorable Minister, for your precise and rather brief but precise presentation. I was the ambassador about 2008. It's about 12 years apart. 13, well, whatever. Now, you're talking about digital. Let me share one story with you. When I arrived there, I think cell phone already started to use, right? But unfortunately, because of the signal is not so strong. So my office and my residents cannot be connected. So we ask people why cannot be connected. Only 1 kilometer. The people answer because the coconut trees block the signal. You see a big change now over so many years. I had an opportunity to visit your country not too long ago. I see the buildings being built up and the road and cars, so many buildings being built up. One thing that never changed, I think, the beauty of the country and the hospitable people and the warmth of the people still remains. I think that's wonderful thing you have kept in the country. Now, I think we have a couple of minutes. I think people would like to ask some more questions. Anyone just raise your hand and your name, please. Go ahead.
Mr. Kofe, thank you, Minister again. Greetings, my name is David. My question will be on Austronesian culture. How would you evaluate the success of applying Austronesian culture as Taiwan's soft power and diplomacy amongst the Pacific Islands? Thank you.
Thank you. I think if you're dealing with the Pacific, culture is something that really appeals to people. And the influence and the power of culture is because of the history behind your culture. Things that have been practiced by your ancestors that gives it a lot of weight and power. And so there are some commonalities between Tuvalu and Taiwan. I believe the indigenous population, there are some similarities in our language. And I think that's a very important tool for building relationships in the Pacific.
Okay, the one with the orange big mask.
Thank you for your inspiring lecture, Minister Kofe. My name is Alfred Tai. I'm a fellow Foreign Service trainee with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And I'd like to ask the Republic of China, Taiwan, and Tuvalu. We established diplomatic relations in 1979. And in a shared spirit of cultivating good neighborliness, Taiwan has, for the past 4 decades, provided development aid and technical assistance to Tuvalu. And what would you say is Taiwan's most notable contribution to Tuvalu's economy, and in which area does the partnership still fall short? And additionally, I read from your biography that you are a lawyer by professional training. How has your professional background in the law helped you promote Tuvalu's foreign relations? Thank you.
Thank you. I'll be a bit biased because I'm looking after communications, but I think technology is an area that Taiwan has invested during our term at least, and particularly during this COVID-19 period, we've seen an acceleration in the adoption of new technology. And so we've been very fortunate with the support from Taiwan, as the Deputy Minister shared, improved connectivity, building 4G networks in the outer islands. As I said, it's made up of 9 different islands. And so our vision is to get 100% internet coverage throughout the country, and Taiwan's investment and support in that area has been very, it's been very beneficial to us. And we recognize that Taiwan is a leader when it comes to technology and cybersecurity. And I think that's partly because of the threats that you face as a country that has made you resilient. And those are the areas that we want to leverage in our relationship to build up the resilience of Tuvalu as well in the digital space. In terms of my background and profession, obviously it helps a lot, as well as a legislator, to have that background when developing laws. But as you can see in this Future Now project, there's a big part of it is on law, international law. So it's come very handy with the work that we're doing.
Right. Any other questions? Oh, the lady sitting in the middle with the pink.
Good afternoon, Minister Kofe and Deputy Minister Tian. My question is, the United States, Japan, and Australia are increasing their defense and maritime engagements in the Pacific to counter Communist China's growing influence. How do Tuvalu and other Pacific Island states view such strategic competition in achieving the right diplomatic balance? Thank you.
Thank you, and a good question. And I think this comes back to the values-based approach that I was talking about. The importance of seeing the world as one. I mean, for us in Tuvalu, it wasn't too long ago that we had World War II, and parts of our island were actually bombed, and there were fatalities as a result of that war. And Tuvalu had no part to play in that. It was a war that was not of our doing, yet we became a victim of it. And so the view from Tuvalu, we value peace, stability in the world. If a conflict was ever to break out in this part of the world, it affects everyone. This is obviously the messaging that we're trying to get out, that no one wins when it comes to a conflict, because we are so interconnected. It affects all of us. There is an approach that we are working on at the moment. Our view is to see how we can declare our territory as a non-combatant zones. And the idea is to get other countries in the Pacific to accept that, so that we counter the move to militarize the Pacific. And so that's one of the approaches that we're taking. And it's very much founded on the values, principles that I talked about in my speech today.
All right. Do we have more questions? Okay, I think that will be the last question.
Thank you, Minister, and thank you for your sharing of your digital achievements. And I would like to ask, given the progress in advancing artificial intelligence, how do you think AI can help to combat climate change in the circumstance?
Yeah, there's obviously a lot of technology that is coming out at the moment, and AI is one of those technologies. I see AI as providing advantages for countries like Tuvalu. We have a very small administration, and it becomes very difficult to fulfill all our obligations as a state. And having technologies like AI enables us to be more efficient, enable us to cover a lot of bases as a country. In terms of climate change, obviously this is a climate change related project, preparing for the worst case scenario. But the solution really to climate change is human activities and the need for countries to take greater climate action. to save countries like Tuvalu and essentially to save the world. Because climate change is not only a problem for Tuvalu, it's a problem for the whole world. It takes different forms in different places in the world, whether it be droughts, cyclones, bushfires in other places. And I think the quicker the world gets its act together, the quicker we're able to find a solution. But unfortunately, the window of opportunity is closing very quickly. That's what the scientists are telling us. And so as much as we want to continue to raise awareness and try to get others to see the bigger picture, Tuvalu needs to prepare as well for the worst case.
Okay, I think we have 4 questions, and I really appreciate Honorable Minister can come here to deliver your very precise remarks. I think we should call this the end of this session. Let's give him another round of applause to thank him for coming here. Thank you.
Yes, with Chinese of IBIA. Today's fruitful discussion will witness to the strong partnership and diplomatic ties between the Republic of China, Taiwan, and Tuvalu. Please give a big round of applause again. Thank you very much.